The Indian Constitution is unique in its spirit and its content. Though a lot of features have been borrowed from various constitutions of the world, but that makes the Indian Constitution very, very unique with respect to the salient features. It distinguishes it from the constitutions of the other countries. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this video today. This is me, Vani Mehra, and we are going to be doing the salient features of the Constitution today here. The Indian Constitution represents a document, represents the system of the country, wherein everything and anything that we are enjoying as of now, be it the rights, be it the duties, be it the governments, be it the judiciary, be it the executive or the lawmaking capacity of the government, is defined clearly in the Constitution of India. The Indian Constitution has not been a very consistent document. What do I say? It's not been a very consistent document or a static, or I would say a constant document. It has been changing, evolving, and is also known as one of the living documents or living constitutions in the world. With respect to the changes taking place in the society and the political structure, there have been various changes that have taken place in our constitution too, which we popularly call as the amendments. One of the most significant amendment that I can very well recall while I'm talking over here is the 42nd Amendment Act of the Indian Constitution of 1976, very popularly known as the mini constitution. It brought a lot of changes to the present constitution and in various parts of the constitution. But our constitution is defined by certain salient features. What do I mean by the term salient features? Salient features means the kind of features that our constitution has, the system that our constitution is evolved into, or the kind of practices that we have around our constitution. And why a certain thing happens in India in a certain way, let's say. We are the largest democracy in the world, and the largest democracy required a constitution. When we were very close to our independence, a lot of people, the Constituent Assembly members, had a vision to frame a constitution for our independent country, for our independent nation. And for that purpose, they had to read and research a lot of constitutions of the world. Obviously, researching is a very good means. For example, being UPSC aspirants, you would also research different books, you would also go and research different toppers interviews, you would also go and research the previous year questions. Similarly, there had to be a recording system wherein the Constituent Assembly members could go and check out what kind of systems were existing in other democracies, other countries, other nations as large, and what systems or what features we could adopt or borrow from different constitutions to make our constitution a unique system in itself, which would stand with the socio-economic changes of the society, which would stand with the diversity of our country, which would also withstand the political and economic changes in the upcoming future. That is why the Constitution is validated till today. Even it was framed way back in 1949. Till date, it has the same validation and value that it had way back then too. So let me take you through the salient features of our constitution. What makes our constitution unique? Even after borrowing a lot of features, what are the features that we have in our constitution? The Indian constitution is the lengthiest written constitution. You must be thinking that what do I mean by a written constitution? Because there is something which is existing like a non-written constitution too. A written constitution has most of the provisions written in a document, in a book, or it is written in a formatted way, which can act as a reference whenever required to make changes in the system, to make changes in the law-making procedure, or to refer to whenever there is any discrepancy, disturbance, or situation of crisis. So, written constitution can be well referred to. It's like a document where you can go and refer to the provisions again and again in order to understand that how and when certain steps or decisions have to be taken. So does that mean that do we have a non-written constitution too? Yes, we do have. The American Constitution largely is represented with the format of the written constitution, like we have our Indian constitution too. And the British constitution is an example of a non-written constitution. But does that mean everything is non-written in the British constitution? No. That does not mean that everything is non-written. That means that largely the provisions of the British constitution are non-written. And when I say Indian constitution is a written constitution, do I mean everything is written into the Indian constitution? No. There are certain things that are not written in our Indian constitution also. But these provisions also have a name to it, which are popularly known as the conventions. But largely, most of the provisions, most of the articles, most of the setup that is there is written. That is why we say it is the lengthiest written constitution. Because our constitution is a very comprehensive document. Our constitution is a very elaborate document. And our constitution is a very detailed document, which makes it the lengthiest written constitution. In 1949, when originally the constitution was written, it contained a document called the preamble, and with the preamble it had around 395 articles and 8 schedules when it was originally written in 1949. And our constitution is also very popularly known as the elephanticized document. The elephant size document. That is the kind of structure, the elephantine size, or I call it elephantine size, basically constitution. But what makes it very unique? Definitely, there have to be certain factors to it, and there are. The first thing that makes it very, very different from other constitutions is the geographical factors. India being a diverse country, geographically too, has the vastness and the diversity from the length and breadth of the country. From Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Gujarat to Arunachal Pradesh, the country varies in size, it varies in geography, it varies in different geographical dimensions. Second thing that makes it a very different document is the historical factors. What do I mean by the term historical factors? Historical factors mean that we have picked up a lot of features, a lot of provisions from the existing acts during the British period. For example, the Government of India Act of 1935, which was a very bulky act, but we have picked up a lot of provisions from that, which makes it also have historical touch to it in the written constitution. We have a single constitution. Indian constitution is singularly the only constitution being followed by all the states in the country equally. That means no other state has a different constitution of its own. Earlier, Jammu and Kashmir was a state which had its own constitution, but as soon as the Jammu and Kashmir was made the union territory of India, all the states and UTs now have only one constitution, that is this lengthiest written constitution, the Indian Constitution. This also makes me point out a very important feature, that we have drawn the Indian Constitution from various sources. Like I previously mentioned, the Government of India Act of 1935, most of the provisions of the constitution of various other countries has been referred to, and provisions have been picked up from the Government of India Act of 1935. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar acclaimed that the Constitution of India has been framed after ransacking all the known constitutions of the world. That's what he said. And also highlighted that the structural part of the constitution to a larger extent is derived from the Government of India Act of 1935. Our constitution has a philosophical part of it too. For example, the fundamental rights. For example, the directive principles of state policy. They are being derived, and the inspiration has been the American and Irish Constitution to pick up the philosophical aspect of our Indian Constitution. Like the DPSP, over here you can see. Then you can see the fundamental rights. I have mentioned largely in this particular picture what features we picked from which constitution. But as a salient feature, the political part of the constitution, like the principle of the cabinet government, the relation between the executive and the legislature, have been largely drawn from the British Constitution. Here you can see all the features that we have picked up from the United Kingdom. There were other provisions too that we have picked up from different constitutions, like the idea of federation with a strong center, the distribution of powers between the center and states, the residuary powers to lie with the center from Canada, the procedure established by law from Japan, the 5-year plan and the fundamental duties which were added later to the constitution from Russia, suspension of fundamental rights during the emergency through the Weimar or the Germany constitution. The most profound influence and material source of constitution is the Government of India Act of 1935, highlighting the federal scheme, judiciary, governors, emergency powers, public service commissions, and most of the administrative details are drawn from this act, making this act a very important source for our present constitution. The Indian constitution is very well known to be the blend of rigidity and flexibility. All the constitutions can be basically divided into two major streams. One is rigidity and one is flexibility. What do I mean by rigidity? Rigidity means rigid, where you can't change things, where there are no flexible provisions to make changes. Flexibility means there are provisions to make changes. There's a very good example to that. Like we see in the present day India, certain laws are being made or certain acts are being made. Sometimes we would also see the amendments happening to the constitution, new changes happening to the constitution, which shows that Indian constitution is largely flexible also. But does not mean that we can change everything in the constitution. We cannot touch the basic structure of the constitution. We cannot go and amend every feature of the constitution, making it largely a rigid constitution. And because it has both the features, it makes it a blend of rigidity and flexibility. A rigid constitution would always require a special procedure for the amendment. Like in the American Constitution, if you got to go and change something, you would require a special provision to change everything. The special procedure is required, amendment procedure. But a flexible constitution is one that can be amended in the same manner as ordinary laws are made, like the British Constitution. And our constitution has various provisions of amendment. In India, we have amendment procedure through simple majority, through special majority, through absolute majority also, making our system more flexible. Our constitution gives us Article 368 to provide different type of amendments to the constitution. Now, there are certain provisions which can be amended by a special majority. That is the two-third majority of members of each house present and voting. And a majority that is more than 50% of the total membership of each house. But there are certain other provisions that can be amended by a special majority of parliament and with the ratification of half of the total states. But there are certain provisions which can be definitely changed with the simple majority of parliament in the manner of ordinary legislative process. But they do not come under the Article 368. Our constitution has a very important feature, that is the federal system with unitary bias. Indian constitution establishes a federal system of government. It contains all the usual features of a federation. Like we have two governments, central government, state government. We have division of powers, like we have the list, union list, state list, and concurrent list. And we also have a written constitution. We have the supremacy of the constitution. We have the rigidity of the constitution. The judiciary is independent, and also there is bicameralism, meaning that we have two houses in the legislature. But we also have a lot of unitary features, like we have a strong center, single constitution, single citizenship, flexibility of constitution, integrated judiciary. Like if you do not get justice as one of the courts, you always can go and appeal into the higher court. The state governor in India is appointed by the center. All India services, like you all are preparing for all India services. So that is one of the major features of a unitary or non-federal feature, an emergency provision, and so on. In India, no state has the right to secede from the federation. No state can come up and say that I want to go out of India. That right has not been given. So we do have a federal system, but with a unitary bias. That is why if you clearly read the Article 1, when you clearly read, it's clearly written, India, that is Bharat, is union of states. And we do follow the structure of federalism. But the word federalism itself is not mentioned anywhere in the constitution. Largely, what is being practiced and seen everywhere is because of the type of government that we have. So we did have the choice to select the form of government that we wanted, whether we wanted a parliamentary form of government or we wanted a presidential form of government. The Indian Constituent Assembly opted for the British parliamentary system of government rather than the American presidential system of government. The parliamentary system is based on principle of cooperation and coordination. Between the legislative and the executive organs. So presidential system, on the other hand, is based on the doctrine of separation of powers between the two organs. The parliamentary system is also known as the Westminster model of government, responsible government and cabinet government. So the Constitution of India does not establish the parliamentary system only at the center but also at the state level. In India, there are certain features of the parliamentary system. There is a presence of a nominal and real executive. In India, if I say the nominal executive being the president, real executive being the prime minister. Majority party rule is there that we have all seen during the elections. It always happens that the majority party rules and then forms a government. There's a collective responsibility of the executive to the legislature. The membership of the ministers in the legislature, the leadership of the prime minister or the chief minister. And one of the most interesting features is the dissolution of the lower house, that is the Lok Sabha or assembly. Because the upper house in India, which is the Rajya Sabha, is a permanent house. So dissolution happens always of the lower house. Indian parliamentary system is largely based on British pattern, because there are fundamental differences that exist, but there are only two major differences that you can find an Indian parliamentary system and the British parliamentary system. So, Indian parliament is not a sovereign body like the British parliament. Indian state has an elected head. We are a republic, while the British state has a hereditary head. That is, they have a monarchy. So, in a parliamentary system, whether be it Britain or India, the role of Prime Minister has become so significant and crucial that political scientists like to call it a prime ministerial government also. But there's another form of government that also exists, which is the presidential form of government, where there's legislature, which is the only law-making body. The president is elected by the citizens, like recent elections are example of that. The president is the leader only, and legislature and president serve a fixed amount of time. The president does not make laws, and he is head of state and chief executive. But what kind of setup we have in India with respect to the parliamentary sovereignty and judicial supremacy? What is this synthesis basically? The doctrine of sovereignty of parliament is associated with the British parliament, while the principle of judicial supremacy is associated with the American Supreme Court. The American Constitution provides for a due process of law against something which is the procedure established by law contained in the Indian Constitution. Now the framers of our constitution, they preferred a proper synthesis between the British principle of parliamentary sovereignty and the American principle of judicial supremacy, where judiciary is at a much higher pedestal. The Supreme Court, on the one hand, can declare all the parliamentary laws as unconstitutional through its power of judicial review. So let us say that there is an act that is framed in the country and people are not very happy with it. So if they have to go and knock the door of judiciary for that, and it comes under the purview of judicial review, the judiciary can also declare a law to be unconstitutional. This is the judicial supremacy. But the parliament, on the other hand, can amend major portion of constitution through its constituent power, because the amendment power has been given to the parliament in the country. Integrated and independent judiciary. The Indian Constitution establishes a judicial system which is integrated as well as independent. The Supreme Court stands at the top of this integrated judicial system in the country, and below it there are High Court at the state level. Under a High Court, there is a hierarchy of subordinate courts, that is district courts and other lower courts. This single system of courts enforces both central laws as well as state laws in USA, where federal laws are enforced by federal judiciary and the state laws are enforced by state judiciary. That is a different setup there. But here it is completely together. It's all integrated. It stands together. This single system of court enforces both the government, central as well as state governments, to implement laws effectively. The Supreme Court is a federal court and the highest court of appeal. It is also guarantor of the fundamental rights of the citizens and the guardian or custodian of Indian Constitution. This reminds me of a previous year question of UPSC wherein it was asked who is the custodian of Indian Constitution, the Supreme Court, the President, Prime Minister. So the correct answer was the custodian of Indian Constitution is the Supreme Court. I guess this was in 2015 this question was asked. Hence, the Constitution has made various provisions to ensure its independence, security of tenure of the judges, fixed service conditions for the judges, and all the expenses, every expense of the Supreme Court is charged on the Consolidated Fund of India. The fundamental rights being the most important rights that we enjoy in our country. All the citizens have been granted these rights, and these rights are against the state. The fundamental rights are being defined in the Part 3 of the Indian Constitution and can be described broadly into 6 rights. Right to equality from Article 14 to 18, right to freedom from Article 19 to 22, right against exploitation from Article 23 to 24, right to freedom of religion from Article 25 to 28, cultural and educational rights from Article 29 to 30, and the right to constitutional remedy under Article 32. These are broadly, largely the fundamental rights division that is there. Fundamental rights are meant for promoting the idea of political democracy. They operate as limitations on the tyranny of executive and arbitrary laws of the legislature. Very popularly are justiciable in nature. That means that if anybody's fundamental right is abridged, they can go to the court and the court will make it enforceable, will give you justice for it, for their violation. Let us pick up one article. Let's talk about, let's say, right to equality. And if there is somebody who feels that there is no equality being given to him and he feels discriminated, he can directly go to the Supreme Court under the right to constitutional remedy, which is Article 32, which is also called the heart and soul of the Indian Constitution, providing the writ jurisdiction wherein you can, as an aggrieved person, go to the court and get the justice for the violation of your fundamental right. So fundamental rights are not absolute. They are not at all given 100%. They are definitely subject to reasonable restrictions. For example, we have right to freedom of religion, right? But during the COVID-19 pandemic, people were being restricted to go out into the temples and go out and, into public gatherings or go out into any religious place. And those religious places were closed for a while because of the pandemic when the lockdown happened. The justification of that we get from the fundamental rights because there is a reasonable restriction to it that for public health, if there is a issue, if there is something which is called like for safety of people, for public health, the reasonable restriction can also be put to the right to freedom of religion. And that was a reasonable restriction put therein. That is why no citizen could eventually go to the court and say that I've been stopped from going to the religious place and public gathering because I want to go, but they're stopping me. This is the abridgment of my fundamental right because there is a reasonable restriction to it. And that is why it was being enforced like that. Further, they are also not sacrosanct and can definitely be curtailed or repealed by the parliament through a constitutional amendment act. Like what happened with Article 31, is something that Article 31 was already a part of the fundamental rights previously, the right to property, but later on it was made normal right under the Constitution. So that means that the legislature has the power to make a fundamental right being curtailed. And during a emergency situation, minded, if there is an emergency, national emergency, they can also be suspended during the operation of a national emergency, except the rights which are guaranteed under Article 20 and Article 21. So there are exceptions to it also. The next most important feature is the directive principles of state policy. According to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the directive principle of state policy is a novel feature of the Indian Constitution. These are enumerated in Part 4, just after the fundamental rights, and they can be broadly classified into three categories: socialistic, Gandhian, and liberal intellectual. What are the directive principles for? These are directions to the states. These are basically the direction to the states to promote the ideal of social and economic democracy into the country, and also establish a welfare state model in India. The directives are non-justiciable in nature and they are non-enforceable by the court for their violation. So you cannot go to the court of law and say that my directive principle is being violated, because these are just directions to the states. These are also the kind of rights that we enjoy. But in case of fundamental rights, you can always go to the court. But in case of the directive principles, you don't have the provision to go to the courts and get them justified. There is a case that gets me reminded of that, which is the Minerva Mills case of 1980. The Supreme Court in this case held that the Indian Constitution is founded on the bedrock of balance between the fundamental rights and the directive principles. So there has to be a complete balance between both of them. The fundamental rights and the directive principles have to go hand in hand, because directive principles gives the rights to the citizens with respect to the directions given by the states, but directive principles. Fundamental rights, on the other hand, gives the rights against the state, wherein the citizen can also go to the court and get justice if the rights are being violated. The next important feature that we have is the fundamental duties. Now, when originally the Constitution was formed, it did not provide for the fundamental duties of the citizens. During the internal emergency of 1975 to 77, by the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976, on the recommendation of Swan Singh Committee, they were added to the Indian Constitution through the 42nd Amendment Act. Like I mentioned in the beginning itself, which is known as the mini constitution also. So there were 10 fundamental duties added originally, and later on in the year 2002, 86th Amendment Act, the 11th fundamental duty got added. So as of now, we have total 11 fundamental duties. A new part 4A, was added to the Indian Constitution for fundamental duties, which consists of only one article, that is Article 51A. The 11 fundamental duties with respect to different things like respect the Constitution, national flag, national anthem, protecting the sovereignty, unity, integrity of the country, promoting the spirit of common brotherhood amongst all the people, preserving of rich heritage of our composite culture, the educational right, all of these act as the fundamental duties of the Indian constitution. And one of the most important features, which also reminds us one thing, that we also have rights, but definitely there are certain duties that we need to follow, which makes our responsibility fulfilled towards our country as well. A secular state. The Constitution of India stands for a secular state. It does not uphold any particular religion as the official religion of the Indian state. The following provisions of Constitution reveal the secular character of Indian state. So let's understand what are these provisions. The first provision is that the term secular was added by the 42nd Amendment Act of the Indian Constitution, popularly known as the mini constitution. So the word secular was not there in the original constitution, but it was added by the 42nd Amendment Act of the Indian Constitution. The preamble secures to all of its citizens liberty of belief, faith, and worship. And the state shall not deny to any person equality before the law or equal protection of laws under Article 40. The state shall also not discriminate against any citizens on the ground of religion under Article 15. We need to give equality of opportunity to the people. We need to give equality, or we need to also give the freedom of conscience, the right to freely profess, practice, propagate any religion. Every religious denomination, or any of its section has the right to manage its religious affairs. No person shall be compelled to pay any taxation. Any section shall have the right to manage its religious affair. Along with that, nobody has to pay any taxes for the promotion of a particular religion. No religious instruction will be provided in any educational institution maintained by the state under Article 28. Any section of citizens of the society, they have the right to conserve its distinct language, script of culture under Article 29. And all the minorities shall have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. The state also shall endeavor to secure for all the citizens a uniform civil code under Article 44. So we have often got questions in UPSC for the comparison of Indian model of secularism with the Western model of secularism, and how does it vary. Now, Western concept of secularism connotes a complete separation between religion and the state. This negative concept is inapplicable in the Indian situation because the society is multi-religious. It's a very diverse society. So the Indian constitution embodies the positive concept of secularism, meaning giving equal respect to all religion or protecting all religions equally. Now our constitution has also abolished the old system of communal representation, that is reservation of seats in legislature on the basis of religion. It provides for temporary reservation of seats for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes to ensure the adequate representation to them. This is one of the most important features of our Indian constitution, which ties up the diversity that we have in our country. The universal adult franchise. constitution adopts universal adult franchise as a basis of election to the Lok Sabha and state legislative assemblies. Now, every citizen who is not less than 18 years of age has the right to vote without any discrimination. So, you are not being discriminated on the basis of caste, race, religion, sex, literacy, wealth, and so on. The voting age was reduced to 18 years from 21 years in 1989 by the 61st Constitutional Amendment Act. That change was made way back then, and now anybody who's above 18 years of age can go out and vote. Universal adult franchise makes democracy a very broad based system, if you see. It also increases self respect, it also increases the uh, prestige of common people, upholds the principles of equality. I mean, everybody above 18 can go and vote, enables minorities to protect their interest, opens up new hopes and vistas for weaker sections. So, definitely, right to vote gives us more opportunity. If we have our representatives sitting in the democratic setup, it gives us more power, more voice. Single citizenship. Though I told you that Indian constitution is federal and it emphasizes a dual polity, we have central government and state government, but provides only for a single citizenship, that is Indian citizenship. In countries like USA, on the other hand, each person is not only a citizen of USA but also a citizen of a particular state to which he belongs. So he owes allegiance to both and enjoys dual sets of rights, like one by the national government and the other by the state government. But in India, all citizens, irrespective of which state you belong to UP, you belong to Punjab, you belong to Jharkhand, you belong to Uttarakhand, everybody is who's born or who's residing, they enjoy the same political and civil rights of citizenship all over the country. And no discrimination is made, like on the basis of anything. Earlier, Jammu and Kashmir had the dual citizenship concept, but again, after it is now a part of the Union Territory of India, after the abrogation of Article 370, after that, Jammu and Kashmir citizens are also Indian citizens. So there's no dual citizenship anymore. Independent bodies. Indian constitution not only provides for the legislative, executive, judicial organs of the government but establishes certain independent bodies. One of the most important bodies is the Election Commission to ensure free and fair elections to the parliament, to the state legislatures, the office of President of India and the office of Vice President of India. Another very important independent body in our country is the CAG, the Comptroller Auditor General. To audit the accounts of the central and the state government, he acts as the guardian of public purse and comments on the legality and prosperity of the government expenditure. The next body being UPSC, the Union Public Service Commission, which conducts examinations and higher central services for recruitment to all India services and higher central services and advise the president on any disciplinary matters. The State Public Service Commission in every state to conduct examination for recruitment to state services and to advise the governor on the disciplinary matters like the UPSC does to the president. The constitution ensures the independence of these bodies through various provisions, like it gives them a security of tenure, it gives them fixed service conditions, it gives them expenses which are being charged on the consolidated fund of India, and so on, making them very, very independent in the true structure and spirit. This is the most important feature of our Indian constitution, the emergency provisions. Article 352 provides for the emergency provisions proclaimed on the ground of war or external aggression. But let us understand broadly like how emergency provisions are there. Indian constitution contains elaborate emergency provisions to enable the president to meet any extraordinary situation effectively. Now, what is the rationality behind the incorporation of these provisions? Firstly, we need to safeguard the sovereignty, unity, integrity, and security of the country, the democratic political system, and the constitution. Our constitution emphasizes three types of emergencies: national emergency on the ground of war or external aggression or armed rebellion, which is under Article 352; state emergency, president rule, very popularly called, on the ground of failure of constitutional machinery in a state under Article 356. If a particular state has failed to follow the directions of the center, then there is the emergency under Article 365. And last but not the least is the financial emergency on the ground of threat to the financial stability or credit of India under Article 360. This has not been imposed so far in our country. During an emergency, the central government becomes all powerful and the states go into the total control of the center. So it converts the federal structure into a unitary one without a formal amendment of the constitution. So there's no immediate amendment done. In fact, immediately the federal structure turns into a unitary one. The three-tier government. Originally, like I told you, Indian constitution, like any other federal constitution, provided for a dual polity, like it had central and state government. But over a period of time, there was a need felt that we require a local self-government also, like at the level of villages, because India is a land of villages wherein there are so many people who are living at the local level. So the 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992 have added the third tier of the government, that is local, which is not found in any other constitution of the world. The 73rd Amendment Act of 1992 gave constitutional recognition to the panchayats. Earlier, we had panchayati system always been existing, but panchayats did not have a formal recognition. So, panchayats were given formal recognition for rural local government by adding a new part to the constitution and a new schedule, the 11th schedule. Similarly, the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act gave recognition to municipalities. This is for the urban local bodies or urban local governments, and they added a part 9A and a new schedule, 12th schedule to the constitution. The last but not the least and the most important feature is the cooperative societies. 97th Constitutional Amendment Act of the year 2011 gave a constitutional status and protection to cooperative societies. Cooperatives are where a large number of people come together, pool in their money, and then they are forming a cooperative and they would work together. Could be a small business, could be any particular unit that they are running. So formally this was given to them, a right was given to them, recognition under 97th Constitutional Amendment Act. And in this context, it made the three changes in constitution. First change was that the right to form cooperative societies became a fundamental right under Article 19 after this amendment. Secondly, a new directive principle of state policy was added to promote more cooperative societies under Article 43B. And thirdly, a new part 9B, was in the constitution added, entitling as the cooperative society, and different articles were also added to it, making the cooperative society as one of the most important part, or you can say features now, that we have added over a period of time to our Indian constitution. Largely, when you go and read certain kind of books, it could have been given you in a very different way. How would you talk about the salient features of our Indian constitution? Could be, it could have been written in the federal and unitary basis. It could have been described in a different manner. We have largely discussed them as points overall, and also talked about what makes it federal, what makes it unitary, what makes it distinct, what makes it connected. I hope that these features have added as one of the most important source of information for you today. And I hope and wish to see you people also looking forward to more videos. Thank you so much. This is me, Vani Mehra. And if there's any kind of doubts, you can reach out to me anytime.